right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Modjeska Simkins School of Human Rights. Of course, that was a wonderful introduction to tonight's class, which I think in a lot of ways is a class that's going to provide transition from talking strictly about the history of activism and protest in South Carolina to taking us to the here and now in protest and activism in the Palmetto State in 2022. Of course, I'm Robert Green II, the lead instructor for the Modjeska School, and I hope that everyone had a thoughtful and wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Of course, a weekend where we should really think about the many wars and conflicts the United States has been involved in, think about the people who've been lost, and I hope that people had a chance to recharge and take a break. I know that the last month in particular has been a pretty difficult one in terms of not just getting through the school week to week, but also all the events that have happened. We've had, unfortunately, several mass shootings in the last month or so all across the country. We've had, of course, continued political and social upheaval, which makes places like the Modjeska School so important for us, I think, more than ever before. So the last few weeks in class, we've talked a great deal about uh, two tracks, really. One, the creation of the religious right and the right-wing conservative movement that has been so prominent in American history in the last 50 years. And on the other hand, we spent the last few weeks talking about the counter to all of that, the revolutionary currents in American society, whether they be through the grassroots organizing workshop in South Carolina or through the LGBTQ movement, both in SC and across the country. Now, tonight, we're going to continue to talk about the rise and flowering of activism movements in South Carolina in the 1970s and 80s. And I could not think of two better teachers on that front than, of course, Brett Bursey and Becci Robbins. This evening's class, I think, is a really important one because the histories that we're talking about, that we talked about the last few weeks, are integral in understanding where we are as a state and a country right now in 2022. Whether you're talking about the potential overturning of Roe versus Wade, the continued debates over gun control, what happened on January 6, 2021, all these things and many more, they don't make a lot of sense unless you put them in proper historical context. And that's, I think, a big part of the last few classes we've had. And that's certainly a major part of the class we're having this evening. Now, don't forget when we last talked about GROW, GROW was really a natural offshoot of the protest movements that the state witnessed in the 1960s and 70s. The civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the anti-war movement, women's liberation movement. By the mid to late 1970s, you're seeing activists in South Carolina, and you're seeing parallels with this in other states too, but certainly activists in South Carolina were starting to think critically about not only what they'd accomplished so far in the 1960s and 70s, but how much more work had to be done. And of course, we're going to talk about that work this evening and really delve into how a lot of that work has set the stage for the current South Carolina Progressive Network. All right. So, Brett, did you want to chime in here, take over from here? How did you want to handle this this evening? And I believe you're still muted as well.
Yes, sir, you do have a role. That's why you're the professional. And I'm going to be trusting that Becci or whoever else knows more than I do at this point in life chimes in, because this is a collective history that really is overloading my memory. But what I want to do tonight is not talk about what we've done as much as why we've done it, because I think that that's probably the most important thing for you to leave the school with, is an understanding of the thread of history that I inherited, that people that were my age that were involved in the civil rights movement, the human rights movement, the anti-war movement, the anti-nuclear movement, right on up to moving right on into today, that there's this thread of history, and that the analysis, when you really peel the covers back, is pretty much the same thing. But the strategy and the tactics have to change and evolve. And so what we want to talk about is how we started and why we changed in the 26 years we've been doing business as the Progressive Network. And the 20 plus years before that is grow, and then going back even further than that into the civil rights movement. But the idea that we're seeing now in terms of what manifests itself as protest, it's not rooted in a strategic approach to systemic change. It's reactionary. And that, I think, having the capacity to react is critical. Being outraged is really necessary. Putting lots of people in the street is critical when they're doing something that lots of people should be in the street. And Modjeska said something, I paraphrase because I'm not sure she used these words, but she says, if you're getting screwed, you better squeal if they think you enjoy it. And I know she didn't say it that way, but that's what she said she meant, was that we have to have that capacity to be outraged, even though we get really worn down and we just can't think it get any worse, and it continues to. But if you can't react and act at the same time, you're not a strategic movement. And so I think that what we've seen in the last number of years now were more reactions, that there has been a disconnect with history. There has been a lack of appreciation for allies that share your values. And so that was kind of what I wanted to lay out, that when we got together at Grow, I had been, see, that was in 70, I was on the hunt for a building. We started meeting on weekly meetings in people's homes in the mid 70s. I had been in prison and on the run for a couple of years from the end of 1970 till about end of 73, when I finally got out of prison, and was quite literally run out of town with men with guns looking for me. I was not in the house, living in Olympia, and I had gone off to get a car part on a borrowed motorcycle. Coming back, somebody ran out in the street and stopped me, and they said, "There's men with guns at your house looking for you." I said, "Oh my." And David Bruck, who, brilliant attorney, had just finishing law school. David has gone on to be one of the nation's #1 death penalty attorneys. You may remember his name. He was Dylan Roof's attorney. But I went to David's house and we called every law enforcement agency you could think of, from like Interpol to, Max Smart and the cops, local cops, federal cops, and nobody said they're looking for me. And I'm thinking, what's worse with men with guns that are cops looking for you? Oh, men with guns that aren't cops, or they're off duty, and it's like a freelance job. I left town that night and had been hit the ground coming out of prison doing impeachment work. Richard Nixon was still president. And I went off and lived at the bottom of a waterfall in this beautiful place in North Georgia for about a part of a year. I had a job as the writer and reporter and the only literate person at the county newspaper, and covering Miss Minnie in her cotton gloves, but also got to do some cool stuff about how the local lakes and stuff were named after the U.S. generals that stole the land from the natives and created the Cherokee Trail of Tears in 1836. But I decided to come back to South Carolina if I could find just this wonderful place to live in for free. Came down to here, was poking around out by Peak, and found an old house that was full of hay, built in 1826, never been painted, 7 fireplaces, no running water, very little electricity. And I bonded with a guy that was born there. His father was born there. His grandfather was born there. His great grandfather built it, and lived there for longer than I've ever lived anywhere in my life, because when I went to prison, I had been in college for a few years. Before that, I'd been in the military with my father, traveling around all over the place. And so I landed back in Columbia and set up housekeeping in this old farmhouse, and got involved with doing a regular meeting for political activities. I was working with a woodworking collective called the Red Potato Work Collective. And the Red Potato was one of our people, had been in the Peace Corps in Africa, and whatever tribe or village he was in, that the red potatoes were really precious, and you didn't eat them, you gave them away. And so I don't know what it had to do with our work, because we charged people for it, but that was what we were, the Red Potato Work Collective. And we started out in the back of 221 Pickens, a cooperative, on top of Pickens Street. It used to be called Wheeler Hill. And I say used to be, I mean, maybe it is still called Wheeler Hill, but it was the university's well, it wasn't their first, but it was one of their major um, gentrification to remove low-income housing of people of color and promised them a better life that never manifested. And the university did that in an expanding circle around the university, down by the Coliseum. It used to be, had been Ward 1, very, very famous black ward. Booker T. Washington School was right there on Blossom Street. And all of that was gentrified and consumed by the university. They have an educational foundation that's a 501c3 that has some understanding of which way the university wants to grow, and they end up buying land and sitting on it for a long time. But the grow meetings were weekly meetings and started out in doing a lot of meetings in Bob Giles' house, and you'll hear more about Bob Giles as we move through the eras. But these are people that Bob had come south. He was a conscientious objector. He was in Massachusetts. He's my age, but born in 48 or 49. And Bob came to Columbia because he wanted to work with the anti-war GI movement that was going on. And Becky, you talked about that last class, right? Talked about the anti-war GI movement. I don't want to.
Yeah, talked a little bit about it, but not about Bob Guild, who is just a gem. You probably, if you're living in South Carolina for any length of time, you know him as an environmental lawyer of real great note. But before that, as Brett was saying, he was a conscientious objector that came in right after the UFO coffee house was shut down. And so he kind of inherited their infrastructure and their, you know, all of the things that were left behind when the UFO staff was run out of town.
And the one of the things we'll put a stake in this business about that early period of the early 60s. We're talking 64. Howard Levy case was 63, 64, 65. Howard Levy was a medical doctor who had been drafted, and he was also somebody that was morally opposed to war, and he refused to train special forces people to do medical procedures because he had people telling him, and he believed it, and it was probably true, that the special forces would save somebody's life and then go in that evening and burn the village. And so he didn't want to be a part of that, so he refused, and he was arrested. And it became an international cause celeb because his case was the first one since the Nuremberg principles were established during the war crime trials after World War II about an unjust war, and that it is your duty to refuse to fight an unjust war. It is your duty as a patriot, it's your duty as a soldier to refuse an unjust command. He said, this is an unjust war, I refuse. And it made huge news all over the world. And so that brought a lot of attention to Fort Jackson, which was also the largest Army training base in the United States, gearing up for Vietnam. And so that attention on the Fort Jackson ratcheted up when the coffee house was established, and there were people that joined the Army at that point from the Socialist Workers Party that joined the Army to organize within the Army. There's a whole concept about turn the guns around, and the wonderful observation that Nixon may have lost a war and may be the first person to ever lose an army, because that's one of the reasons we pulled out of Vietnam, is that it was getting out of control. The Army was protesting, and so that's looking down the road. If you had some kind of like crazy guy that was president of the United States and he wanted to kind of like overthrow the government, watch what the generals are doing. I mean, we'll come back to Smedley Butler, who was tried today. Dr. Green, we've talked about Smedley Butler before, haven't we? But that if as long as the bad guys can't get control of the military, we're probably going to weather the storm. And that the GI Coffee House was shut down. And what year was it, Becky? 69?
Yeah, they opened in 68 and they were shut down in 70. They were open for 2 years, almost exactly.
And I was at the university then, and I was also traveling for the Southern Student Organizing Committee, and we had been organizing on 7 different campuses in South Carolina. And the people that had been, the white people that had been involved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. In 64, there was a joint agreement that the white people should go organize on white campuses because there was more problem with racism on the white campuses than there was on the black campuses where the white students were trying to be helpful. And so SOC was created, the Southern Student Organizing Committee, in '64. And my first protest was in '66 at University of Georgia as a freshman, when Lester Maddox, rather open Klansman and flaming racist, won the governor's race in Georgia in 1966. And ended up at USC at the main campus in '68, involved with AWARE, and it was a student activist group that I had started out doing civil rights work, but as the war progressed and I'm on a white middle class campus where they're drafting people, the analysis of America's sense of privilege and the fight was internationalized, that the people of color in Vietnam, the people of color in South Africa, South America, et cetera, were part of this international oppression by the colonial people and the imperialist people and whatnot. And so the merger of the civil rights work and the human rights work and the anti-war work was certainly something that Dr. King spoke of the year before he was killed with that Riverside speech, which all of you have to keep close at hand and read multiple times. It's one of the most powerful things ever written. Silence is consent. And Modjeska Simkins wrote a program for the radio show that she had called "Woke Up This Morning with Freedom on My Mind." And she came out in '66 against the war in Vietnam. And this is something that I believe is available at the university libraries, for her documents that I've helped preserve and other people have. And written across this radio script that she wrote, this program says "rejected in its entirety." And so that was her connecting the dots in terms of the war in Vietnam being an extension of the type of brutality that we'd seen happening going back to colonial days and before colonial days by white privileged people with money that wanted more money and power. And so what we did with the Grow was on a weekly basis we were meeting, and I'm starting to look for a place. We got to institutionalize. We need a phone, we need an address. And I was looking around and looking at different buildings and found one in Olympia that I'll show you a picture of if I can share my screen a little while. The Grow building, and it was empty. And you could see it was 2 stories, 5,000 square feet, but from downstairs you could see the sky because the roof had holes in it. And so we worked a deal where we could have the building for fixing the roof and fixing it up. And Becci can put a picture of the Grow building up there if she wants to. And we were there, moved in '77, started working on it. My mother, God bless her, came down and helped for months, stayed with me for months, and she lent us $10,000 that I think we're still trying to pay back to taking care of my sisters now. But the Grow started with the concept of being self-sustaining. I've had this notion from the beginning that the revolution will not be grant funded. You're going to get to a point where they're not going to give you money. And so how do you do that? Well, the concept of popular movement means that the people that want to be popular in the movement, it's their movement, they should support it. And so that is a premise that we carried over into the Progressive Network, which isn't working as well as it needs to. But everybody needs to be a member, paying a little bit every month. But that at Grow, we started a cafe, the Grow Cafe, which was a legend in its own mind. There was a sign inside the door that said, "This is not a bar, it's a lesson." And it was one of the really cool places in Columbia. It was the left bank, well before its time. This is '77, '78. As the dawn of Aquarius had already dawned, but we were still kind of slow there in South Carolina, becoming Aquarians and hippies and whatnot. And the cafe had at one point 7 people working there full time that were cafe workers and whenever, and they were activists when they didn't have to be cafe workers. They had a big house on Whaley Street, but one of the big old management houses, the mill workers. And in 81, we started a print shop. That it was something that I'm sure that every revolutionary has always wanted to be able to print things. And so we got a little printing press and we were printing for ourselves, and we started taking in work, and we got better at it and more tools. And I think it was about right before Apple came out with desktop computers that we bought a photo typesetting machine, a used one, for $35,000, which you could buy a brick home for in South Carolina then. And 2 years later, Apple came out with desktop publishing, which I was convinced it was a fad. The computers were a fad that would go away. I was wrong, and I felt like the old guys that used to laugh at us when we got the computerized typesetting, when they had the hot lead machines. So the print shop was at a time when obviously there was no internet. And so we were printing newsletters for virtually most of the nonprofit groups based in Columbia, the ones that were national and statewide. And we were bringing in money. We had, I think, at 1.6 people working in the print shop, 7 people in the cafe. And we were pulling the money. And Becci, tell the story that Wendy tells about payday at Grow.
It was just that we were all living really close to the edge, and financially in every other way. But on Fridays, Brett would take somebody would go to the bank and get whatever, the dollar bills and 20s, and he'd line them all up on his desk. However many, I think there were about 5 of us working there usually at the time, and he'd make these little stacks and like hand them out. And it was just so primitive and scary to have it all scaled back just so like that, like stark. It's not like somebody putting money in your bank account. It's like a stack of $20 bills at the end of the week. And so in a way, it was very equalizing, because you knew what everybody else was making. There was a lot of transparency there, and you knew that everybody else is in the same boat. But at the same time, that you, especially in the print shop, if you took real pride in the quality of the work, because if you had to do it again, it was you that wasn't going to get paid at the end of the week. Everybody wasn't going to get paid, and you didn't want it to be on your head. So, there was like the quality of the work was really good, because everybody was very aware that if they didn't carry their weight and do their job, take it seriously, that they were all going to pay for it. So I did appreciate that about it, as scary as it was to be living that way.
But the neighborhood was something, and the building is still there. I mean, you can still go down to what used to be Old Bluff Road, and you can't even get through there anymore from Whaley Street. They built a student housing in the middle of the road. But the baseball park that sits on Assembly Street, the old ballpark, and that street that runs alongside of it, Dreyfus, if you go down Assembly, turn hard right on Dreyfus, you'll come up to Old Bluff Road, and there's the old Grow building. And there's a mural of the Incredible Hulk smashing through the front wall that was quite meaningful to us. Richard Lane, he was our resident artist, very, very capable and competent fellow. And Richard drew the Hulk smashing through the wall when we were doing the anti-nuclear work at the bomb plant in the late 70s. And we had, I guess the first protest down there was 77, 78, we had one, and we kept doing them right up to the 90s. Had probably a cumulative number of 700 people arrested at the bomb plant. And so the Hulk was actually a mild-mannered nuclear physicist who tried to stop nuclear weapons testing and got irradiated and became the Hulk. And he went on a pogrom against, imperialism and militarism, and then he was our hero. And so that was kind of missed by a lot of people, but it meant something to us. And so, Becci, what else we need to talk about the Grow building before we talk about our anti-nuclear work?
I think what you've kind of missed, and I think is really critical, is the whole cultural component of it. That part of it was really practical. When they started, they had the cafe to make the money. That was, that it was to help sustain the organizing work that they were doing. And so downstairs was the cafe. I'd hope that Brett would pull up some photos.
I'm going to do it.
But there's, it was a really funky cinder block building, 2 stories, just really basic. And downstairs was the cafe and a stage, and upstairs were the offices and the print shop and where all the organizing work happened. So there was like this kind of stratified thing to it. But the way one person put it when I was talking to him about what he remembers about it, he said you could go in and have a beer downstairs at the cafe, and then you could go upstairs and see what somebody was doing, and there'd always be something for you to help with. So there was always something going on, and there was whatever your skill sets were, you could help typeset something, you could help just stuff envelopes, you could help do something, and so there was and then you could, when you were done with that, you could go back downstairs and have dinner at the cafe. And so it was like a full service kind of lefty confab. But I think, again, back to the cultural element, that it provided a stage for not only local garage bands, and Wendy Brinker, who was one of the stalwarts and was there as long as Brett was in and out. She was heavily into the music scene and in the art scene as well. And so she thought, she really understood how important that intersection of doing the organizing work is with bringing people into that space. And sometimes the entree is like through poetry, sometimes it's through music, and there was like the gamut. There was reggae, there was punk, there was straight up rock and roll, a lot of blues. And so it was this very vibrant place for people to hang out. And so there was this, what I think has been missing from our organizing work, at least for the network, for a while, and part of that is because you don't have a physical space, is that this whole notion of having time to be together that's not just in meeting spaces, that if to get to know people as in social settings and having some fun and kicking up your heels and sharing stories, and that is where the glue, I think, happens. And I think we underappreciate that. And that's why I'm so excited about having a new grow building, but that's later on. But it's really important, this whole cultural aspect of the organizing work.
So Daniel, can you, or Becky, here we go, share screen. Somebody nod their head if they can see my screen. Oh, look at the nodding heads. So this is, I want everybody to know that this is something that you can do at home, boys and girls. If you go to the Progressive Network home site, and up at the top of scproduct.com, there's 4 little icons. One of them is Flickr. And if you click on Flickr, there's these pictures that just go and go and go. And there's albums and videos, and you can find out more about what we've done than we remember. But this is the building that Becky was referring to. So that's it. And it wasn't built well a long time ago. And it was, well, I would say that if you didn't know better, you would think that you were on a movie set, made you to feel that you were on LSD, because there were no corners, the floors were uneven, and it was a strange place. It was so strange that one time the state law enforcement division came and asked us if they could film a drug bust practice, educational film in our building. And we thought about that for a long time. We said, sure. That's like, and we never saw the film though. We need to FOI that. But it was a very welcoming place. If you ask people their recollections, they say they would just let everybody come in, and we would have literally the mayor of Columbia trying to be mayor. And one of the reasons we got to be in this building, having a cafe with no money, and it wasn't really, there was a good friend of mine's child called it the Gross Cafe, because it wasn't, we were on a septic tank, which is not a good idea if you've got like 150 people in the event. And so anyway, the city limits was just outside, like the center line right here. We were in the county. And this was a real experience in redlining. If you look at a map, you can still do this. You look at a map back then, it was worse. And you see these little donuts. And there were the black communities and the poor white communities that didn't have any tax money. And so the city just left them out. There was no garbage, there's no water, and there was no DHEC coming to knock on your door about inspecting your restaurant. And so we could not have existed in the city at that point. But the Grow Cafe was and is something that is a legend in everybody's mind that was there. And I have encountered many people that said they were there that I'm not quite sure, but they think it's chic. Supreme Court Justice Jean Toll tells a story about being there. And the mayor was there. The senior editors of the state newspaper, when it was family owned, would hang out at the bar. And they would be next to mill workers. This is literally a mill section. On this side of the building was Monk and Hazel. Monk worked at the mill for 50 years. He was in a union that wasn't very good, ACTU, American Clothing and Textile Manufacturers. But when he retired, his paycheck was $50 a month. He got $1 a year, but he got a watch, a cheap gold watch. It wasn't real gold though. But on the other side was Pete and Tina, and Pete had worked there for most of his life. And the burden of being a mill worker and living in a mill town is something that we don't really experience anymore, because these mills were built when they moved mills south because of northern issues, wage issues, union issues, environmental issues, and mills moved south in the early 1900s. And about this time that we're talking about with Grow, the mill down the street that these folks that around us lived in, it moved to Nicaragua. And so that's something that we watched, that deindustrialization of America happened in the 70s, where we started buying things from other places where we could get cheaper labor. And so that's a picture of some of the crew. I think I counted, there's 9 of the people. That's my sister, and that's a much younger me. And there's Michael Gooding, who's still working with us. And Michael is the main contractor fixing up the building now. And that's Richard Lane. He is the artist. And there's the Hulk. There's probably a picture of the Hulk in here, Becky. There's inside the cafe. That's Ray. And Ray was the first kind of openly gay organizer. And this was in the late 70s. And he started a gay group that was meeting at Grow. And that's Richard painting some incredible artwork behind a draft box. That's one of Richard's calendars. This is evidence that we were pretty left. Nearly 50 years ago, and we had a discussion on the history and direction of capitalism in America. We had meetings on most Wednesdays, and some of these calendars mentioned in Grow meetings. Some of them don't, but that was an upstairs downstairs thing. That we did have an issue with the upstairs people and downstairs people. And so we always try to resolve that amicably. The upstairs people work with the print shop and the movement stuff, and the downstairs people ran the cafe and the music scene. And that's Kevin Gray, is a very younger person. Some of you know Kevin from many activities in Columbia, running a restaurant. There's Nightlight at the cafe, and there's that guy again. And that's Merle. And Mr. Merle lived there. Merle lived in a little room that was referred to as what, Little Tijuana? Was that it, Becky, I think? And he lived in that room for 22 years. And he never very few people got to go in that room, put it that way. And it was amazing. It was kind of like the clown car. He could, how much stuff he had in that room. And Merle passed away, unfortunately, a few years back. And he is remembered and missed. He kept quite an album of reality and history. And that he's sitting at my desk at the time, and we can see. I must have been busy because the desk is messy. That's the cow. He was one of our baristas. I have a sign that was literally put up in 1950. When we segue into nuclear stuff here, Becky. We got to come back and do the print shop. Let's hold on the nuclear stuff. So we started the print shop in '81. We're printing for everybody. And we printed our own magazine called Harbinger Publications. The name of it's called Harbinger, the magazine. the name of the print shop was Harbinger Publications. And the obvious play on words there is Harbinger is something that comes before to give an indication of what is to follow. And so that was us with our revolutionary zeal. And in 1991, we were doing all kind of statewide organizing. By 91, we've started the anti-nuclear stuff with the Natural Guard, which was our 501c3 that we started to help support the anti-nuclear work. And we had gone international. I mean, we had activities and people coming from Europe and Japan in South Carolina. But the Point was a newspaper that we started in 1991. And it was a very, very good publication. We started out foolishly thinking it was going to be a weekly and we'd make money off of it. And that I think that lasted a very, very short time, like 1 or 2 issues. And it then went nonprofit monthly and printed 100, and I believe it was 111 issues over an 10 or 11 year run. And we distributed it statewide. We UPS'd small towns. We drove stacks of papers. We print like 30,000 papers and take stacks of them to Charleston and Greenville and Columbia, where our main distribution places. And this is before the internet. People read newspapers. And so this is how I met Becci. Becci was working at the Bar Association. And 91 was when God sent AIDS to America to punish homosexuals, and this was what was taught and believed in South Carolina by at least the Christian Coalition, who was the tail wagging the legislative dog. The Christian Coalition, which we have talked about in previous classes, really was a dominant force that you had to, if you were going to be a legislator, you had to support the Christian Coalition if you were going to be a Republican anyway. And the turn of the screw there was that we were the only state that didn't allow anonymous testing for AIDS. And so the worst way to deal with an epidemic is to make people afraid of being tested or treated. And so people were having to leave the state to be tested, because if you tested in South Carolina, it was the law that they would pick up the phone and call your employer or call your school, find out who your friends were. And so people weren't getting tested. And Becci wrote a story about that for the Bar Association newsletter that they wouldn't run. And so she brought it to Point, our newspaper at Grove. And she checked in and she never left. And so we're very, very, very fortunate that Becci escaped. I think I do recall her saying that she would rather work with us than have 6,000 lawyers for bosses. And so we can take some credit of liberating her from that. Do you have a disclaimer there, Ms. Robbins?
I don't remember saying that. And can you quit sharing your screen if you're not gonna show something?
Okay. But I'll have to go back to it.
Oh Lord, maybe I shouldn't have
This
said
is the problem. This is the problem. This we getting into the nuclear stuff. So let's talk about the nuclear stuff now.
Well, Brett, let me just say something, because I think Point is important.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. It was a there were a lot of alternative newspapers going on at that time, because like Brett was reminding everybody, this was before the internet and people were still hungry for information, and especially stuff that wasn't like all the other information, which is being kind of like McDonald's. The news has also become this homogenized thing that's like fed down from on high. And so that local reporting has gotten squeezed out. And I think that you see that South Carolina is a really important example of that, the silencing of newspapers. It's really, it hurts me as somebody that went to school to study print journalism just as they were shutting that thing down. So my timing has always been not great, but I think that to me, it made it really critical to understand how if you're going to have a movement, you have to have ways to get your message out. And I think I said a lot of this in the last class, so I hope I'm not being repetitive, but it is so critical, I think, for us to remember that. And I think that point, at the same time that there were other alternative newspapers going on in the US, that they were, to survive, it's really, really hard to do that. As Point, Point is an example of that as well. They started out thinking that was going to be a for-profit thing that was going to be weekly, and they blew through their money before they knew what had hit them. And so there were some serious-minded people at it, but they were not business people. So that thing failed at about the same time that I, as Brett was saying, trying to I was trying to find a home for this story that I'd worked really hard on about the AIDS epidemic in South Carolina because of Harriet Hancock, who you met at the last class, who was doing pro bono work for PALS, the Palmetto AIDS Life Support Services. And so my people, when I was working in the bar, working at their newsletter and their magazine, asked me to do a profile of her. And I did, and was exposed to this whole other world that blew my mind, which was about being because I learned about PALS. I did a thing on her, and then I followed through, and just that whole community and the really just heartbreaking and beautiful work that everybody was doing around AIDS and gay rights in general. And so I shifted gears from working at the bar to thinking, this is really meaningful work. This is lesson number 2, that if you really care, but if you want to, that it's really important to follow your heart if you're really serious about doing organizing work, that you have to take some risks sometimes. Because I left a good paying job. Wendy tells the same story. I think a lot of us that found ourselves in that grow building could have made a decent living, but it wasn't fulfilling work. And so I would think, especially for younger people that are just thinking about what you want to do with your time here on earth, and if you're serious about doing organizing, if you're going to stay home, and we hope you will stay in South Carolina, that you're going to have to create opportunities for yourself, and you're also going to have to take some risks. A paycheck and benefits, they're nice, but they're not necessary. And I think that when you take a leap of faith and really put your heart into it, which is what I did with Point. So we kept that thing alive for 10 years when it really shouldn't have lasted that long. And we did that because we turned it into a basically volunteer driven effort. And so that there were a lot of talented people that were submitting things. And so it had this organic quality that the larger papers, the other alternative press, I keep skirting around it, but the other alternative press was turning corporatized. So the way to stay alive, that you would do ads, and you would base your ad budget was basically dictating stuff. You'd have to cover bands, and you'd have to cover cafes opening and restaurants and blah, blah, blah. And then the big thing that really moved, that kept people afloat in terms of the quote unquote alternative press, were the classifieds ads, where you could, so-and-so meet so-and-so. And it was like this dating thing, which I thought was really icky. And so we took this leap of faith. We're not going to do that. We're not going to quote what I thought was basically selling out. And we're going to trust that we're going to have enough people in the community that have stories to tell, issues to share with folks, and ways that they can get on board. And it really worked. And we had, it wasn't always, it was never perfect. So it had a kind of a gritty quality, which I kind of appreciated because it felt real and it felt authentic, because it was made by people in the community, for people, it was by the community, for the community, and it showed. And beyond that, because the folks that were involved with it had a real history in the community, they had connections with lawmakers and people in that state house that they could go to and get the inside scoop on stories. And so we were able to break a lot of stories and create long-lasting relationships with people who are our allies in the state house. And my favorite part about Point was, and everybody else's, was our gossip column, which was called Loose Lips, which was the centerfold every month. And it was just gossip about, gutless lawmakers and corporate stooges, and you know, it was just a fun poking of the buttons of the power elite in South Carolina, but it was really written kind of, you know, cheeky and edgy. And my favorite thing of all was like, because we did everything, we'd print the thing, we'd design the thing, we'd take the thing in the middle of the night to the printer in Newberry and bring it back and Bleary, and the next day we'd be putting it out on the streets. And so I remember going around to cafes and the places that we'd distribute, and one of our distribution places was the State House. And the best thing of all, the biggest reward of all, was to see the days of distribution when the lawmakers all sitting at their desks thumbing through to get to loose lips to see whether they had made it into ink that month. And the end piece of every loose lips was sleazeball of the month. And so we'd pick some sleazeball, usually somebody in the State House, and whoever could name that sleaze, the first to call our office and name that sleazeball would get a free subscription. So, you know, it was fun. It was relevant. It was, I think of all the things that I've done, that's the thing that has brought me the most joy. And it makes me sad that we don't have something like that now. And I hope there's somebody listening that would consider trying to do some kind of sustainable magazine format. That was the other thing that Point did, was long format stuff. Now you get everything in like these little tiny bites. And so everything's kind of like little tiny bites of things. But if you could take a larger dive into things, I think there's some formats that aren't being explored. And that's all I'm saying. I'm so sorry for going on so long.
Thank you, Becky. You earned the time. And the paper was really a very well done professional piece of investigative journalism. We would take on a story and spend months on it. And we broke a lot of stories. And that someday they'll all be online. There is an online, you have to you go to the Progressive Network website, put /point. There's not a link, is there, Becky? But you can get there by putting /point behind our address. But I want to go back to some of the things that grow before we go on to the nuclear stuff. One of our first projects was direct relation to Jimmy Carter, because we had started the building in '76, and Carter was elected in '76. We got in '77, started open the thing, and one day, or it might have been one night, Merle came upstairs and he said, "There's a wild man in we call it the rat room. In the rat room, wants to talk to you. He says he's got money." And I went down there, and it was a wild man with long hair and glowing eyes, and he was the state director of Volunteers and Services to America. And Carter had appointed these Vietnam vets and civil rights activists to head the Peace Corps in Vista, and he gave us 10 salaried positions that we had for a number of years at Grow during Carter's administration. And we were like trying to not feed hungry people. We were trying to stop hunger. We didn't, want to help ameliorate the problems like a liberal. We wanted to get to the root cause of the problems. And that was fine with the people who were running Vista in the Peace Corps at that time. And so we started working in the lower Richland community. Bluff Road is where our office is. You keep going down Bluff Road, you're in lower Richland. And this fellow here was a magistrate down there, Glenn Davis. And that's Hattie Frewster, very famous civil rights activist, who's a friend of Modjeska's. Her children integrated elementary school, middle school, junior high school, and high school. She had 5 kids. They integrated all 4 levels of school in Richland County on the same day. So a heroic move. And they're still good friends of ours. Hattie and Glenn, who both passed. The food buy, which was in this building back here that was a fallen down building on Bluff Road that we got to use for free again. And that they ran the food buy. These 2 guys are volunteers. They ran the food buy for 40 years, and that we helped set it up, and they took it over, that's the plan of an organizer, is to get somebody else to do your job. And that one of the things that made it work, and one of the things that made it unique, was that we got the food co-op, the Grow Food Co-op, classified as a merchant, which meant we could take food stamps, put them in the bank, and then send people to wholesale markets and triple the value of the food stamps. There's no grocery stores out there anyway, and if there were, they'd be expensive. And so it was a really novel way of leveraging food stamp money. And so it lasted for 40 years until Ms. Rooster passed, I think it was in 2017, and Glenn passed last year. And so it was a really good run, and we're really deeply vested in District 70, which was Joe Neal's district. And we met Joe Neal in 91, 92. He took office in 92. And we met Glenn Davis. This tiptoes into the nuclear story. Westinghouse Nuclear Fuels Plant, it's one of the largest nuclear fuels plants in the world. It's on Bluff Road. And being the good anti-nuclear people that we were, we had a couple of people that went out there and demanded to see the management. They refused to let them see the management. They refused to leave, and so they were arrested. And that was Susan Urquia and Michael Lau. And they demanded a jury trial. And they had a jury trial in front of Judge Davis. And they had 6 Black women as jurors. And David Bruck was their attorney. And David used the competing harms argument. If your child was drowned in a neighbor's pond and you jumped over the fence to save your child, were you trespassing? And the jury found him not guilty. It was the only case we ever won direct action civil disobedience was in front of Glenn Davis with David Bruck. But those are the type of deep relationships that we established nearly 50 years ago, and that we still have. And that's one of the extreme values that we need to maintain and pass on to new organizers and activists. And so let's move on to nuclear stuff. There's Merle again. That picture organized. This is a good picture. You can't quite see what's in our hand there. In 1990, was it was in the 80s. Yes, it was. It was a sunny day. And that we had gotten permission to put up a sign on the State House grounds. And that sign said, "Remember Vietnam, keep South Carolina National Guard out of Central America." And that the issue was that it's mid-80s, 84, 85, we were involved in protesting American adventurism in South America, South Africa, South Vietnam. And it was part of it. It was an extension of anti-racist work, because these are places where people of color are being exploited, and that the Sandinista government had been elected in Nicaragua, and the US Congress had prohibited military action to destabilize Nicaragua. And so what was happening was Reagan was president, and he had a Democratic Congress, and Reagan was getting Republican governors to send their National Guard to the borders of Honduras and, strut and fret and beat on their chest and, be intimidating. And so that was what the sign was about. Keep South Carolina National Guard out of Central America. And we went to put the sign up the day, it was a time when some of you are old enough, maybe remember when the United Way had a big sign right in front of the Confederate monument that showed the money coming into the United Way. We could get permission to put up a professionally made 4x8 sign in little holes that were already in the ground. We'd breathe the sign up, we go to put it up. And they said, "Well, you can't." I said, "Well, why?" They said, "We changed the rules." I said, "When?" They said, "This morning." I said, "Really?" We started asking questions. Bob Guild, who you've already heard a little bit about, and Bob Hallman started looking into it. And we filed a 1983 action against the governor and the Budget Control Board. The Budget Control Board has been reorganized into the Department of Administration, but the Budget Control Board was 5 people that ran South Carolina. It was the governor, the treasurer, the Speaker of the House, and the President of the Senate, and somebody else. And that at the time, there were 3 Democrats on the Budget Control Board. And so we were taking depositions. This is a lawsuit in federal court. And the 1983 action is when somebody that is empowered by some type of authority, state authority, federal authority, that uses their authority incorrectly, you may sue them. And so we brought an 1983 action against the governor and took depositions. And the Democrats said, well, the governor said we didn't know anything about the sign, and that the decision was simply that the signs could fall over and hurt somebody, like a child could be crushed by a sign, or that somebody driving down somebody's street would see it and crash their car. And as we took depositions from the Democrats on the Budget Control Board, they said, oh yeah, the governor knew about it. We had 8 meetings. The governor wanted to ban Bursey's sign. We said, you can't do that. That would be content related. The best you could maybe get away with is ban all signs in the future because of aesthetic concerns or safety concerns. So that's what they did. And we had a federal trial with a jury, and the judge, after the governor came in and testified, we subpoenaed the governor. He had to show up, and he came in and lied through his teeth. And I'm thinking, now we've lost it now. Governor Carroll Campbell, was charming lad. And after he testified, the judge said, I would be remiss at this point if I didn't issue a directed verdict of guilty. The parties have till 10 o'clock in the morning to have a settlement on my desk. And by 10 o'clock in the morning, what's in my hand right there was a $50,000 check. And we spent $35,000 of it on a new 2-color printing press, which was for years and years and years, printed all the propaganda you could imagine. And it was the Carroll Campbell Memorial Freedom of Speech Press. And so that's a endearing and heartwarming story. And so it's time to move on to nuclear stuff. And we're going to look, well, first of all, I want to tell you that we were an IWW shop. We were a union shop when we started in 1981. And the Progressive Network is still a union shop. And so we have deep and strong relationships with the working class. We are the working class. And so there's just, you can go to Flickr and you can do this and you can see all these cool things. There's that picture that you see frequently. That's 1984. That was the picture I took in my office of Modjeska when she ran for city council against C.W. Cromartie and lost. It's because people, we'd be passing out brochures and Ward 1 down, and there was a District 1 for the state, for the city council. And people would say, you gonna give me a bottle of liquor like Mr. Crow? And Cromartie was buying votes, and the Simkins wasn't. That's me being arrested in 1970, the occupation of the state of the Russell House. When I was not in the Russell House, I'd already been banned from campus. That's my SLED agent that was above ground, and that's Sonny Clark, the head of the narcotics division in Richland County. The whole story about that. So we're going to move on to the nuclear stuff now. If I can get back to some of those pictures that were in a chronological sequence. When we've got to start with World War II being over with. We need to touch briefly on what we have mentioned, if you missed the class, that James F. Burns, was a U.S. congressman from Aiken County, and took in Barnwell and Aiken County, and he ended up being one of the few people, if the only person, that ever actually served in executive and judicial and legislative branches of both the U.S. government and the state government.
Albums.
Hmm?
Albums.
Albums? Okay. Which album?
This one.
I understand. Well, show me, help me back.
Yeah, you can scroll down now. You get to the.
That's what.
There you go.
Oh. Okay. So in 1950, this is after the nuclear bombs have been dropped on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We have the first arguments that I've seen outside of some rather narrow academic circles that the bombs probably would not have been dropped if it had not been for Jimmy Burns. And that Burns was a rabid segregationist and an anti-communist who was able to perceive that communism was a way to disempower Black liberation struggles. And so the Jimmy Burns wanted to see the bombs dropped, even though the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the scientists said, no, don't do it. Just do a demonstration, drop the bomb on an island somewhere and tell people this is going to happen to you if you don't back up. But Burns insisted that we do that to get a leg up on the Soviets after the war, and it started the arms race. And so that's a deeper dive that we need to probably have a special session on. But what happened was that America needed to make bombs. And so where are you going to put the bomb plant? And if you're doing it in 1950, Jimmy Burns is at that point coming in as governor of South Carolina, leaving being Secretary of State. Prior to that, he ran the Office of, I think it was called War Management. He was in charge of the budget during the war for Roosevelt, and then he became Truman's assistant president. That's what they call him, the assistant president. He'd been appointed to the Supreme Court and stepped down off the Supreme Court to take the jobs during the war. And so that those of you that remember, we may have mentioned that Brown versus Board would have been Briggs versus Elliott had it not been for it. Jimmy Burns said, we're not going to name that up South Carolina, because he'd just come off the Supreme Court. But Burns has a very large footprint in South Carolina. It's not quite nationally and internationally in terms of affecting international diplomacy. So when they decided where they would put the bomb plant, they surprisingly put it in Jimmy Burns' old district. And Jimmy Burns is governor, and you got Strom Thurmond, kicking around then. I remember 48 was when Robert 48 was when the Dixiecrats, when he ran for governor, for president on the Dixiecrat ticket. So there's a lot of large egos in South Carolina playing on a national stage. And so, and they all happen to be from the Aiken-Barnwell area. And so it was no surprise that the largest construction project ever was situated straddling Aiken and Barnwell counties. And that they condemned 312 square miles of property, moved a couple of small towns, dug up graves and moved them. And that whole story of the building of the bomb plant is really something. And there was a sign here that I had earlier, but I don't see it now. But that sign was one that people in Ellington, the little town that had been eaten, said, they're going to build a bomb that'll destroy towns. People that love their town as much as we love our town, dear little Ellington. And so there was a pushback, but it didn't stop the government. And so obviously many years later, we started protesting the nuclear weapons construction and the waste that is there. One of our slogans was that the nuclear waste is the bomb that's being dropped on those it's intended to defend. And we were encountering cancer clusters. Friends of mine, an attorney of mine that was from Barnwell, a friend of mine, Lewis Pitts, his law partner, actually, those of you that will know or will know Lewis Pitts through the school, was the prime person that drove for a long time the effort to get compensation for people that had obscure cancers that were directly related to radiation. And it was only in the last couple of years that they quit fighting each case and just said, if you worked there I can't remember the years, but they did a class action waiver for people that had worked at the bomb plant. The bomb plant since 1950 has had no less than 12,000 people working there. There's still nearly 12,000 people working there every day, and they don't make anything. I mean, they're managing nuclear waste. I think they're separating some plutonium, tritium. It's a hydrogen element that has a short half-life. The bomb materials like plutonium, the half-life is 250,000 years, so you don't need to make any more. But we got into the nuclear weapon stuff after we had started out on the nuclear commercial protest, and that these pictures here are bomb plant related stuff, and the demonstrations we did were remarkable in their thoroughness and their strategic organizing. This radioactivist handbook was something that was printed by a collective. Remember, we had the Vista workers. We had government paid employees in Barnwell for a year before the first big demonstration. And they were they're doing alternative energy things in schools and solidifying a relationship with the farmers that didn't really appreciate the fallout. And so when we did the first protest down there, Becky, if you've got dates better in your mind, correct me if I say something that's terribly wrong. I think the first one was 78, April 78, the second was fall of the next year. And they focused on the commercial nuclear stuff the first year, which was the Allied General Nuclear Services, which was a plant that was built that never did open, because it was the intention of it was to take plutonium out of commercial fuel and recycle it into bombs, which was just prima facie violation of all the nuclear treaties anybody had ever signed, because it's exactly what we try and stop other countries from doing. This is what Iran's been trying to do, that allegedly for years, is to separate nuclear fuel and pull the bomb material out, because it is only through the fission process that you get the highly radioactive material that you can make a nuclear weapon with. And so, starting with the commercial process into the nuclear stuff, we had a series of incredible demonstrations that were, I don't know of anyone, if anyone knows of someone that had a bad experience, speak now or forever hold your peace, but most people felt that were really transformative events. And Becky's handing me a note saying talk faster, that this type of direct action is something that we had legitimized as a means of communicating, raising issues, and we will get into that as we move forward. And we need to get into that again, because it's critical that that is a tool in your organizing and your effectiveness toolkit. And so these are arrests at the bomb plant and people marching at the bomb plant. This fellow here, Jackson Brown, was a big anti-nuclear, and he did benefits and gave us money, but he also played at the first Barnwell protest, and we didn't tell anybody he was going to be there. And I have friends, this is decades later, that left before he played that are still mad at me, because we didn't want to bill it. This is when he was at the height of his career, like one of the lead performers in America. And we had 5,000 people without telling them Jackson was going to be there, and we didn't want it to be billed as a pop festival. And Jackson later called the Grow Building and asked if he could use the name Musicians United for Safe Energy, which Susan Urquia had created to raise money with local musicians. She was a musician working at Grow. And Jackson went on to put on the Muse concert at Madison Square Garden in '78 that Bruce Springsteen and just about everybody you could think of played. It was quite an event. And so we're now going to segue into Medicaid expansion. Becky, there, if I go back to the album, there are pictures from that.
No, I thought we were going to use the videos.
Oh, that's right. We had the
about,
video stuff. Oh,
yeah.
yes.
So let's move to the videos.
Daniel, let me set this up because I remember now where we are. So, because of what I said at the beginning, is we want to talk about not what we did, but how we did it, why we did it. There are two examples of stuff that we've done. There's much more that we've done, but we don't have time to relive history. But the Medicaid expansion work was preceded by a lot of work on a moral budget. So we start with the moral budget work, and that the moral budget was something that we came up with in 2010. 2010, and that was the year that the legislature created the Tax Realignment Commission. It was called the TRAC Commission. It's like a 600-page document that the Senate staff did, and that it showed that South Carolina was leaving more money on the table in sales and use taxes than it was taking in. We're taking like 2.5 billion, leaving 3 billion on the table through exemptions. And I mean, you dig into it, and it's like, well, who gave the porta toilet people an exemption for 2/3 of the sales tax? Well, that would be the porta toilets, really smart lobbyists. And so there were something like 80 something exemptions. And we worked with Mike Fanning, who's now senator from Fairfield. And Mike was coming at it from a perspective of schools being underfunded. So we chronically underfund two things that are by law supposed to be funded by a certain amount. One is schools, and the other is local government. Local government is supposed to get 4% of the general fund every year. And every year for decades, they say, oh, sorry, we don't have the money. And they'll pass a proviso in short circuit schools and local governments. And so there was a very large audience that included mayors and city council people and chambers of commerce in small towns that were wanting to see something happen with this information. There was an assessment that we're leaving too much more money on the table than we're taking in. And we had, our plan was to use the money to pay our bills. Their plan was to use the money to lower taxes. Well, wait a minute. Lower taxes when you're not even paying your bills, that doesn't make good capital sense. And so this was a really pretty high profile drama. And we had one protest with like 3,000 teachers. But when it came down to it, it was up to us to take the message to the people. And so, Daniel, if we can run those clips that start with us on the steps of the State House.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear about why we're here.
Yes, sir.
Let's be clear about what we're going to do now that we're here.
Yeah.
First, let me tell you that we're here demanding justice.
Yeah.
And lastly, let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to keep on demanding. On Monday, the House will begin deliberations on the budget. And on Monday, we want you to come and pack the hall. We want you to look these legislators in the face and tell them we want a moral budget. They need to hear from you and people like you. Because too often those who dwell and work in this building behind me never get to see the people they hurt. This time it's going to be different. This time they're going to hear from the people. And I hope that you agree with me in saying that to those who say there is no use, that there's nothing that can be done, that things are going to be the way they're going to be, I hope you join with me in saying to them, that's a lie. I want you to turn to your neighbor, look your neighbor in the eye, and say, we're not giving up. We're not going to quit. We're going to keep fighting to fund the moral budget. God bless you.
Yes, you can see that's why he's my minister. That's why he's my co-chair. He is not a politician. I want to close by giving you some instructions. The instructions are to organize, to join a movement. If you don't like ours, start your own, we'll work with you. But Donna DeWitt and Joe Neal have been working to build this thing into a democratic movement that represents the interest of people. A good political force grows from an organized popular movement. We have to make that movement. We have to show people that it makes a difference to care. And the way that you can do that most immediately is by being in that building this coming Monday at 11:30. This shirt that I have on. You can own one of these shirts if you come to the lobby at 11:30. You can pick them up on the other side of the Confederate flag. And I want to say that I've been here in South Carolina competing with third world countries for the last 30 or 40 years. Telling people up north, y'all come on down, our workers is stupid, they work cheap, we smash unions, we don't have any environmental regulations, come on down. And you know what's happening now, folks, with Nikki Haley? She's deciding we do not have to compete with third world nations, we can be one.
That's what you see on the news.
I said, they're throwing the people out on the step with signs, and a group of them at that moment were in the lobby and started chanting, which is not allowed.
Stop the cuts! Stop the cuts! Stop the cuts!
And the speaker's eyes got this big. I said, they're coming. So he said, we'll work out something. Okay, so we, instead of having 20% cuts, we had what?
5% cuts.
And a lot of things didn't get cut that would have gotten cut. So a lot of it, whether it received any press or not, that rally had an impact.
Those of you that missed Joe Neal live really missed a wonderful, wonderful, capable human being. That was Joe Neal, Reverend Joseph H. Neal from Lower Richland, a school minister. He has a PhD, and he was the voice of conscience in the State House, working with Gilda. Gilda Cobb-Hunter was his suite mate. And so that when Joe said, we got something from that, that day, before that day was over with, that was on a Monday. They're not in session on Monday. They'd come back to work on the budget, and they replaced, I think it was 2/3 of what they cut. It was like $380 million. And so people with a clever plan and a whole bunch of t-shirts that are audacious. You remember Nikki said we have to be audacious and obnoxious and in their face can actually make a difference. And so we're going to run through the next example of this type of audaciousness so we can get to y'all talking and asking questions. And then the next issue, Becky, we have anything else to say about the moral budget stuff?
No, the only thing that I would add is that the importance of, as bad as the quality is of that video, at least there's video, and it's a better quality if it's not, for some reason, when we run it through Zoom, the quality is even worse. So if you want to see these things better, you can go to YouTube and find our channel has all these things and they're a little bit better quality. But what has been bugging me a lot in the working on this Grow book, and the lack of photos and the lack of videos and the lack of people documenting what happened. So I would, this is the selfie generation, but let's look beyond that. If you've got a camera and you've got a phone, the quality of photos are great. So if you're out and about and doing things, it's really important to document it. That's all.
I want to point out that small creature behind Becky is something that has given her a new lease on life from being so stressed out. That's a little kitty that came into our lives a couple days ago. So Daniel, let's talk about the Medicaid expansion. And before we do that, let me set it up a little bit, Daniel. Dr. King said that the greatest of all injustices is the inequity in healthcare. And don't get me started. I mean, I don't understand why Americans are putting up with this. We're dying earlier, we're paying more, and they jack us around on a regular basis, and they're treating people that are actually trying to save people's lives, they're abusing them. And it's kind of like the teachers and the healthcare workers are the new peasants to kick around. But this is, again, an example of a circumstance. We knew we could not get them to pass Medicaid expansion. Nikki Haley had said, we didn't just say no, we said never. And what I knew was that most people didn't understand what the hell it was about, what we were refusing. We turned down, South Carolina turned down all the money that was available. At 1.4 billion a year, there was 50 something million that was supposed to be used to help people get into the insurance pool. And then there was more money to help give people a Medicaid card that didn't have the income to get into the insurance pool. And so we turned it all down. And the network, because we were a nonprofit, the Affordable Care Act was giving grants out to nonprofits to do the work the state could have done. And I think for the months and months and months we worked, we had a dozen people that were navigators helping people get into the insurance pool. Half the calls we got were from people that we had to tell, we can't help you, you're too poor. What do you mean too poor? That you're below 138% of the poverty level, which means you're supposed to have gotten a Medicaid card because the Affordable Care Act figured you'd have money for insurance. You didn't get your Medicaid card. And the reason you didn't get your Medicaid card is the governor refused them because she thinks you don't want the government to get between you and your health care. And so there were people, including Supreme Court justices and chiefs of police, that had no idea what we turned down. So what we wanted to do was change the dialogue, because everybody said when we're going into a new session in January, have a new session legislature, that it was a done deal. We're not even going to talk about it. And we made them talk about it for weeks and weeks. Roll the film, Daniel. This is the first day, January 14th, a cold, rainy Tuesday. To call a mass action on a cold, rainy Tuesday is a dangerous thing. At 10 a.m., there was no one there. Roll the film, Daniel.
Dramatic, chilling call to action. Why are we calling this Truthful Tuesday? It's because our leaders have gotten off track as to what the truth is. They've been telling us for an awful long time that the state is too broke to fund education. It's not true. They're now telling us that the state is too broke to participate in the Affordable Care Act. It's not true. When they refuse to take the money this year, there'll be 250,000 people. They could have had health care, most of them for the first time in their life outside of an emergency room, paid for by the American citizens, including us. Governor Haley and the majority party have decided to make some political point by refusing to use our money to provide health care to our people. We have to tell them, enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. That's what we have to continue telling them. I've been telling them for a long time, but I think that there's forces gathering and that the people that are doing things for petty political reasons, and they see government as a bad thing. They see government as the problem. So if government is the problem, taxes are bad. If taxes are bad, critical core services are bad. Health, education, infrastructure, civilization is bad. My friends, this is about civilization. This is about the type of state and nation we want to live in. We live in the only industrialized nation in the world that healthcare is not a right. I do not want to live in that place, and I am not moving. I need your help. I think we've got the wind behind us. The governor has not been telling the truth. The Republicans are saying we can't afford to expand Medicaid. If the University of South Carolina Business School says that in 2020, when we actually have to put in 10%, this is a 9-to-1 match, friends. It's a really good deal, better than Las Vegas. It would cost us maybe $130 million a year. The business school says that by 2020, the $1.4 billion that would come in each year between now and then, and the 44,000 jobs that are created would generate more tax revenue than we spend on our 10% match. They've been telling us we're broke for a long time, and they're leaving much money out of the table in special interest tax breaks. If they wanted to find the money, they could undo the state's $300 sales tax cap on luxury automobiles, yachts, and airplanes. Speaker Harrell only paid $300 sales tax for his airplane. The Molly Rice lawyers only paid $300 for their yacht. Somebody paid $300 for the Lamborghini, and somebody paid $300 for the $6,000 Chevrolet. That's not right. If you undid that one tax break, it would bring in $138 million this year, cover the health insurance for 250,000 poor people. And you know what? Every homeless person in South Carolina would have a Medicaid card. Every homeless person. So this is not the end. This is the beginning of a new phase of this fight. Many of you have been in these bridges for truth and justice, and what I know and feel is my American way. Standing up for each other, taking collective responsibility. We need your help. Stay tuned. Become part of the Truthful Tuesday Coalition. There'll be tables set up at the edge of each back corner there for you to take a pledge to stay involved. And you can do it in your hometown or here in Columbia. Thank you so much for coming.
If you guys don't leave the roadway now, I'm giving you a warning. If you guys don't leave the roadway, we're going to have to take you into custody. You're breaking the law. All right? This is city property. You understand that? I understand that. You all. I need you to turn around, please. Put your hands on your back.
Let me take this so I can do something.
Okay.
So I can keep it.
I'll put them in front, okay? I'll bring them up for front. Okay. Good. You're not resisting. I understand what you guys are trying to do. You know we got to enforce the law. Just get a little uncomfortable. Just kind of put your hands on like that. If you want to.
We are here to give thanks to whatever way we want to express our journey to God, whatever name that might be for you, to say thank you for the support that we have from the community about wanting this legislature to move on Medicaid expansion. Let us kneel and pray. Those that can kneel, you may want to stand. Oh God, in whatever name we give to you, we are grateful that we are here, attempting to show our courage, our statement to say that South Carolina needs Medicaid expansion. The money is there, but people are dying. It's estimated that 1,300 people this year will pass away and die because of the lack of Medicaid support.
Amen.
Be with us on this day. Be with us, inspire us, encourage us, support each other as we move towards our next step of hoping that this state legislature will do something and move towards being a humane way of being with people.
Amen.
We give you thanks in whatever way we can give thanks. Thank you. Amen. And Allah, in whatever way we want to say thank you.
Thank you. Amen and amen.
All right, folks. You understand you're in violation of the law blocking the roadway here.
Yes.
You understand you can be ticketed and up to jail time for blocking the roadway. I need you to step out the roadway. Everybody here, you understand you can be ticketed. Okay. At this time, You are all under arrest. Okay. I will be taking you over to the sidewalk and we'll be conducting some paperwork. Please step over to the sidewalk. Okay. Step up onto the stairs. Folks, onto the stairs. Step out this way. Step out this way. Smooth. Step out here. Step onto the stairs, please. Step out this way, please. All right, over onto the stairs, please. When everybody makes it to the stairs, I need an ID card.
Is that people in these two chambers here are more concerned with losing a primary election in June than they are in taking care of their constituents and the least of us. And that we want to make people ask questions that haven't been asked. Prior to our being arrested the last 2 weeks, the chief of police told me, he said, Brett, I had no idea that we turned down a free Medicaid card for all the homeless people in Colombia. He said that the homeless situation in Colombia is now being dealt with by police with guns. There's social service agency with guns. That most of the people on the streets have some type of mental problem or physical problem. And we turn down health care for these people so these people can win their primary in a state that 70% of the people that hold offices in these two chambers win their elections in the primary. We have the least competitive elections in the nation. Most of the people in these chambers won their elections in the primary with over 90% of the vote. It's interesting to point out that Vladimir Putin won his last election as president of Russia with 68%. These people are outdoing the Soviet-style communism that they decry so. We have to continue making people understand what's happening here because the obfuscation, the smoke and mirrors of the anti-Obamacare people have people so confused. We have people, I had a black minister a couple weeks ago tell me he thought Obamacare was illegal in South Carolina. And so we are doing a good job. We are making the media ask them questions that have not been asked. We're making people wake up and say, well, what the hell's going on? Why did these Republicans turn down all this money in these jobs? Yes. And so they may take the money next year after their primaries are over with, but we are going to raise the issues to show how shallow their decisions and their concerns are. Senator Davis is leading some type of debate society in there about, libertarianism and the founding fathers and the French philosophers, while people in his district are going to die this year because of his position. It is a game to these people. And you getting arrested in the streets of Colombia is very important and helps people understand it. And I know we got the navigator here is going to testify. Come here, Roseanne. Yell out.
Well, I just am not willing to look any more people in the face to face, while they tell me they lost their job because they have cancer. The chemotherapy that they need to continue, they got a letter from Palmetto Health telling them they're not going to continue it because they don't have insurance. And oh, by the way, he's the only caretaker for his wife who has a brain tumor. And I have to look at him in the face and say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do because Nikki said no. Because Nikki said no. Nikki doesn't even know who this guy is. She will never see his face, and that's the problem. She needs to see the faces.
see it. We want to let Nelson Rivers, Reverend Rivers, this Baptist Educational Missionary Convention minister in Charleston, South Carolina.
Well, thank you for standing up for what's right and not being intimidated by the fact that the state doesn't allow protests in the State House. That you will continue to be faithful, don't back up and don't back down. And most importantly, this is the right thing to do. That's the wrong thing to do. We're standing on the side of the right, which means we're in the majority. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you. Now, we need to do.
Wow. There are a few instances that I feel proud to be an American, but watching this stuff that we've done is really one of them. So this is what you folks got to pick up and carry on. And it's gratifying. It is gratifying. So Dr. Green, why don't you take questions? Becky?
Right. Yeah, I just briefly want to say that one of the reasons we ran so many videos, at the risk of saturating you guys with that, we just picked 2 different campaigns, but we wanted to illustrate in part just how powerful those kinds of things can be, but also that I think what a lot of folks these days seem to be forgetting is that you can't just have a rally and expect things to change overnight. So these are examples of sustained campaigns that you have to, you know, in the case of the Medicaid expansion stuff, it was targeting the legislature for weeks. So we had 39 people arrested over weeks in that campaign and maintaining a presence. So that was over days that you saw in the lobby of the State House. So it was really hard to ignore that. And I think that what we've gotten a little soft in thinking all you have to do is have a rally and have like inspiring speakers and things are going to change. You can have the best damn speeches of your lives. And you've got to have media people to cover it. Might not happen. We know about that. You can have like a lineup of things that you've got all of your poly positions. You've got everything straight. You're right. And you know that. It's going to take more than a one-off thing. You're going to have to keep a sustained thing. You got to keep the faith. You got to have a long-term vision. You've got to commit. You've got to not be disappointed when things don't go well, and just keep your eyes on the prize. It's like, it's all a long process. So don't be discouraged. And really, these things take time. So don't forget, it takes time and commitment.
Thank you, Becky. And the bottom line here is that we have to be able to do protest and policy at the same time. And we're the only game in town right now, folks, and have been for a long time. It's really important for me to point out that there have been and still are no radical, progressive C3 organizations that are led by people of color in South Carolina. We have done everything we can to incorporate Black leadership, and we really need help because we know we can't win without it. And Modjeska knew that she couldn't win without us white folks helping. And so this is part and parcel to impress upon you that which it is that we have to share with you and for you to carry on. Dr. Green, take some questions.
Yes, and again, that was a great presentation by Brett and Becky, a really important one. I want to encourage folks to put questions in the chat. While we wait for those to come in, though, I do want to go ahead and ask a question, and this goes back to what both of you said at the beginning of tonight's conversation, which is this question of how does a progressive movement, avoid just being reactive to events on the ground? In other words, how do you construct a positive vision for the future in terms of thinking about not just what you're reacting to in the here and now, but what you want to see society look like 5, 10, 20 years from now? How do you actually craft that particular vision? Just curious as to your thoughts, both you and Becky, about that.
Dr. Green, you're asking me?
Yes, you and Becky, about this question of how do you
Becky,
avoid?
answer
I
me.
know it's a big question, but I keep thinking about that because we've mentioned this a lot this year, especially at the Modjeska School. This question of you don't want to just get drawn into battles of reacting to things on the ground, but how do you build a broader vision in that?
Well, Dr. Green, the answer is you need to be gratified by that which it is that you're doing. And are you gratified now? Are you happy doing what you're doing? And maybe you need to look at a different methodology of finding happiness on your short time on the planet. I was so blessed. I mean, the time I spent in prison, the 2 years I spent in prison, was the most valuable time for me. It was the time in the cave to find out, why am I on the planet? What am I going to do with my time, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm thinking that what we need to do is to be able to model that type of value-driven life that we gain pleasure and enjoyment and practical purpose from. And that's what Dr. King called the beloved community of shared values. We need to build a beloved community of shared values that reinforces the values and supports people to share those values. Becky? You got to unmute yourself, sweetheart. Your space bar will unmute you.
So sorry. I'm not sure I understand the question, Dr. Green.
Sure, I'll ask it again. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, please.
Well, my question was this. We've talked a lot in the Modjeska School this year, especially about creating movements that aren't simply reacting to events on the ground, right? That aren't just reacting to things that are happening, but are instead thinking long term, like trying to go from merely reacting to an event to saying, well, how can we change society to where that event no longer occurs? And my question is, how do you build that vision? How do you build that into an organization, to a movement, to say we're not going to respond to, say, just police brutality right now. We want to build a society that will no longer have that kind of issue. Like, how do you build that kind of line of thinking about long-term organizing, in other words?
I think what has worked for the Progressive Network, and before that with GROW, was creating a framework and then having things rise organically. Because I think the problem with a lot of nonprofits, at least in my experience, has been that they've got this things. Usually, we're the only. I mean, as far as I can tell, at this point, we're the only homegrown nonprofit in South Carolina that's not being told what to do. Not to say that everybody's dictatorial, but in some ways, it's true that a lot of the organizations on the ground in South Carolina are being told what to do by a national agenda. So anybody that's got a long-term, a nonprofit on the ground in South Carolina is usually being prescribed organizing work from on high. And I've said this before, and I maintain that South Carolina is not like any place else on the planet for all the reasons we've been talking about. So what they have to offer, we appreciate support, but they don't have a clue how to work on the ground in South Carolina. So I'm saying, in terms of what I think has been important for the Progressive Network and for GROW before that, is understanding that things have to happen from the ground up. And so that our agenda has always been like whatever people are feeling and doing on the ground, so it filters up rather than filters down. So it's stronger and it's authentic, and it's got a buy-in from the folk on the ground. And I think that that is really critical for the kind of work that we want to do. And I think that the thing that also is about the network and the GROW and Point and any of the and the Modjeska School is that it's got to be state-based. You have got to have like a state-based framework to understand what is going on, because again, peculiar South Carolina. So it's got to reflect what is happening at the time. So I don't think that there, I guess a long way of answering your question. I don't think that in the beginning at Penn Center, when we had our organizing meeting, we could predict 20 years out or even 10 years out what we would be doing. What we did do was create a framework. So who's at the table? Everybody that supports our mission statement. What are we going to do? Whatever is floating your boat and whoever is banging the drum loudest, we're there for you. And who's got the strongest ground game. So it's kind of this thing that works and morphs depending on who's doing what at any given time.
Dr. Green, let me stick in a couple things here before we go to the floor. Modjeska said when asked, how do you keep doing this decade after decade? She said, I guess I'm just selfish because it makes me feel good. That's what I want you to feel, that this is gratifying. This is why you do it. And the other thing is that we are we're very well-rounded. And there's this old saying that I can't remember, Daniel will tell me who it's from, well shod on all 4 feet, that what nobody here really knows, because we haven't talked about it, and it was on my longer list of the agenda, was what in 2016, we started doing electoral politics differently. We went through a period of doing it the same way, which was we endorsed everybody that agreed with us, and then they would lose, and then we would do it again. And that's the same thing the Democratic Party does election after election. And since 2000, the game is rigged, and we can tell who's going to win. So what we've been doing is really strategic, kind of like special weapons and tactics, going in and picking the fights. And we are changing the outcome of elections, literally by hundreds of votes, one way or the other, taking out the last Black representative in the House because he didn't support Medicaid expansion, getting J.M. Moore to represent that district that Sammy Rivers had. And J.M. Moore didn't even know that we did 5,300 postcards to people that didn't get Medicaid expansion in his district, made phone calls with Gilda's voice on it, with Omari's phone number in it. J.M. Moore didn't know that until after he took office. We took out the stupidest legislator, Lee Bright, who after Mother Emanuel still wanted to fight a Confederate flag. This guy wanted us to be the incandescent light bulb capital of the world because they're trying to steal our incandescent light bulbs. There were no Democrats running in Spartanburg. We had 86 members. We got together, voted for in the Republican primary, and took Lee Bright out. People don't know that. But what we're doing is developing the power to punish or reward. And some people that know that. And so that's the type of thing. It's time for us to come out of the ground with that, because both the parties are falling apart. Dr. Green, take it to the floor.
All right, so I think that's actually a good segue to a question from Greg in the chat. He asked this, why did Modjeska Simkins lose to Cromartie? What were the issues? Did he just out-organize her, or was she just not popular enough in the Black community due to her quote-unquote communist ties?
I would say she didn't pass out enough half pints of Wild Irish Rose. The city elections are not well attended, not well, there's not much turnout. And I don't think we ran a very good campaign. And she wanted to do something just to hold Cromartie to task. And so I would pass, it was Greg asked that, I would pass on that, Greg. We'll have a longer discussion about why she lost, because it wasn't, this is the page we need to turn. We can't affect national or state legislation. There's this old saying about states are the laboratory for democracy. That's not true. Local government, county council and city council are the laboratory now. We've got to focus on that in the coming future. And we have not been. And so that was a reason Modjeska lost.
All right. Okay, so on that note, there are a couple other questions from Greg and then one from Daniel in the chat I really want to get to before we're done tonight. So first from Greg, he has 2 questions. Besides the FBI, what organizations were responsible for there really being no active Black progressive organizations in the South? And question 2, Martin Luther King and the SCLC used the Black church as an organ for social change. What is different today? How can that also be changed? I think what he's saying there is the Black church was once a very powerful tool for social change. In that era, it seems that today that it's not, doesn't seem to be the case as it was then. I think that's what he's getting at there.
Well, Greg, there are no active Black progressive organizations in the South isn't true. They're where the money is. Going all the way back to the 60s, I knew people in Raleigh and in Atlanta. Julian Bond was elected legislator in 1968. Tyrone Brooks, and there are other people that, because of the support, the indigenous support. There's no indigenous support here for it. There's no money here. If you don't have any money, you got to do it the hard way. And we've done it the hard way. I also think that the level of oppression in South Carolina has been historically and consistently greater than we've seen in North Carolina and Georgia. And the next question was about MLK and SCLC use the Black church as an organ for social change. This is a really, really painful point in our lesson plan. And it's one that we've got to come back to because it's painful and we have to unpack it slowly. The civil rights movement was a very necessary and important fight. It got some laws changed that the white power structure passed. And Modjeska and W.E.B. Du Bois were people that pointed out that civil rights is something they can grant you and take away. Human rights is what you came to the planet with. And so what we talked about during that period of Southern Negro Youth Congress organizing, when they were talking about the death blow to Jim Crow, they were a militant organization. And that the Red Scare smashed that and gave rise to the domesticated civil rights movement, where we saw the ministers and the people that had an opportunity to be upwardly mobile within the existing power structure had a chance to be more important, make more money. And so that co-optation of the Black liberation movement by the civil rights gift is something that was, some people say, a trap, because it stopped that militant movement for liberation predicated on economic justice. So that's a longer discussion, Greg, that I need to have.
Right. And I think this is a good question from Daniel. I think this would be our last question for the evening because it's gonna, I think augur some discussion. But reflecting on the new left of the 1960s and 1970s, what were the missed opportunities? That could be a whole evening of discussion to itself, I think. And then secondly, what lessons would you impart to the aging millennial left rapidly missing their own opportunities?
Can I
Go ahead, Becci.
Can I just say something here? Daniel, I really appreciate that. And I had asked Brett to ask you, and now I'm going to put you on the spot because apparently he didn't.
Brett asked him, we ran out of time, and I was going to ask Dan to do
Well, no, because I think I didn't want to make this all just happy chat because we've got a lot of stuff that hasn't worked. And, you know, anyway, so I'm just saying that I think it'd be interesting to hear what Daniel thinks about the New Legacy Project, which was the youth organizing arm of the Progressive Network. And I used the past tense because it did not survive. And I think that there may be some lessons for us in terms of just trying to do youth outreach, A, and B, you know, it's like there's this generational divide that we've only kind of briefly touched on every now and then, but it is huge. And I think it is worth, not tonight, obviously, but it's worth creating some spaces, maybe creating workshops. We've talked around this for years about this intergenerational divide. And we can all learn something from each other. I'm just wondering, Daniel, please explain what the New Legacy Project was, what you guys intended, what happened to it, and what are your lessons from that?
Sure. So it was started in 2013, Becky. That's close to 10 years ago.
When you were young.
When I was younger, yes. And so many of the people on the call, Kyle, Wayne, who you saw, the gentleman with the suit being arrested, Chris Gardner, Chris McLaughlin, all of the people on the call, we were sitting around a campfire at Penn Center, and we were really in awe by all of the activists, the wisdom, all of this, etc. And so the question is, how are we going to make this last? There has to be a youth component to train the organizers and the leaders of the Progressive Network in the future. And so just, Becky, you said, you know, it did fail, right? And so there are internal reasons, there are external obstacles, but we took Samuel Beckett as he was our slogan: try again, fail better, right? Try again, fail better. So we're hoping to try to fail better as we move forward. Really just briefly, we were the troops of the network, Missing Voter Project, many hot days, Kyle, Chris Gardner, Wayne and I out there educating people about Medicaid expansion, 10 cities in 10 days. Wayne and I, 2 a.m. coming back from coastal Carolina, giving presentations, going to Bamberg. Becci, you were there, and so on, right? Secondly was the Subversive Art Festival extravaganza, right? We had the idea of bringing together the activist and the artist communities, right? And so we had 500 people the first time, 200 people the second time. Secondly, in terms of the failure, and I'm willing to argue about this, maybe not tonight because it's a deep discussion, but I see this repetition of the left, right? I see particularly now the identitarian politics of the 60s being repeated in a degraded fashion. So it's critical that all the struggles are addressed: race, gender, sexuality. However, with NLP, this became infighting. Who should be centered, right? Should it be this group? Should it be that group? And so on and so forth. And so there became a hierarchy of oppression, right? How are these things weighted? And this is the bloody thing: who gets to decide it? There were some of us in the New Legacy Project who really wanted to focus on fair maps, irrespective of your issue, LGBTQIA, environmental justice, and so on. If you don't have a functioning democracy, nothing will work, right? You can protest, you can throw bricks through windows, you can register people for, Uncle Joe Biden, right? But we wanted to be radicals, right? And so really it was, and I'm willing to admit perhaps my leadership wasn't what it should have been in addressing these issues, but it was the splintering amongst identity that tore us apart, right? And so I just see that repetition on a degraded level, and it's something I really think about, how we need to address all struggles, right? But when, there's the old saying that the left is good at struggle, too bad it's just struggling against each other. That's a problem, I saw posed in the 60s, as it were, and I see it being repeated. And so this is the last psychoanalytic wisdom I'll leave you. This is from Freud: if it's not remembered and worked through, it will be repeated. And I see these issues repeated from the 30s and the 60s in the present, right? And again, I'll take what responsibility, Kyle and Wayne and Chris can reflect on my leadership and where it fell short. But that's my reflections on what was the New Legacy Project, and hopefully it'll be reignited again in the near future.
I know we got to go, but let me just say, Daniel, I did not mean to frame that to be so critical of you, because you and Kyle and Chris and all of these people have been doing the grunt work for the network forever, and we applaud you and love you for it. So it's not about that. I'm just trying to understand what it is about, and this is a conversation for another day, about trying to involve and sustain a youth component to the network, which is obviously critical. And thank you for your service to all of you young people. I don't mean to be critical at all. I'm just hoping we can all learn from things. And y'all did they did a podcast, they've done some things. The safe things were awesome. So they did some great stuff. I'm just sorry that it wasn't able to live forever. Well, maybe it'll be resurrected.
Right, and just briefly, Becci, we should be self-critical, right? We shouldn't turn defeats into victories. We should face reality with sober senses. So
that's my comrade. Dr. Green, there's something that we need to tell people. It's like 8:30, but we have our after class time where people can stay and ask questions, because we went too long because we're really verbose. But there was a really important thing I wanted to do, which is to point out that Dr. Green is a year older on June 10th. And that yes, he is. And I'm so pleased he's made it another year, because he is an absolute gift. Absolute gift. And I've got so much dirt on the man, he can never leave us. But let's sing happy birthday to Dr. Green. Becci, lead the song, because I'm really bad at it.
Well, no, first of all, we tried this last year and it was a miserable failure. So first of all, y'all need to unmute. Everybody
unmute.
And if you're not going to sing, just lip sync. Okay? We all good? No, everybody's not unmuted. All right, we're going to go on without y'all, who are probably off having snacks. Okay, ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Dr. Green. Happy birthday and many more.
Now let's wrap this
Happy
up.
birthday to you.
Yeah. You're
Happy
birthday, baby.
Live long and
Happy
prosper.
birthday, happy birthday, baby. Happy birthday, Robert.
Oh my God.
Good night, everybody.
Last year was actually better. Okay, I quit.
Happy birthday, Dr. Green.
Love you.
Thanks. I mean, I do appreciate that. Although I think Daniel's words about turning defeats into victories may include that rendition of the Happy Birthday song. But I digress. But no, all seriousness, thank you, everyone. I do want to say that doing the Modjeska School since 2019 has been a truly important experience for me living here in South Carolina. It has turned from a place where I received a degree to a place that I now call home. And a big part of that has been the Progressive Network. So thank you, everyone, from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. And I think tonight's conversation is an important one. Again, as Brett mentioned, if folks want to stay around after the tune and the play and talk a bit more about these issues, more than welcome to do so. Next week, we will have, on the 13th, we will have Lewis Pitts to talk about corporations, law, and democracy in a really important conversation about some of the forces that we're up against. But again, I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. Without you, we wouldn't have Modjeska School. And as I always say, keep the faith. So again, thank you all.
Let me mention that you are on this Sunday coming at 5 o'clock for the Teach Truth. The Progressive Network has been working with the Zen Project and Teaching for Change since we started the school, and that we are national sponsors of a Teach Truth Day, Teach Truth Weekend. Actually, you could choose the day between the Saturday and Sunday coming, and we chose Sunday at 5, and that we're going to put a marker in the ground. The Modjeska House will be open for an hour and 30 minutes from 3:30 to 5. So those of you that haven't been to the Modjeska House can go in, because what the Zen Project is doing nationally, this is a 50-state thing, is to evidence the reality. The racial oppression is part of the history of this country, and that we can't be better until we learn from it. And so we're having a Teach Truth Day, which happens to come 2 days before the primary, where we'll be selecting a superintendent of education. And so Dr. Green will be hosting that. But we'll send out another notice tomorrow, and everyone will get one. And Daniel, you want to play enough music for us to powder our nose and come back a minute and a half? You don't have to go long on it, but play it. This is James Holloway wrapping up that wonderful, wonderful event at the State House.
That's what we're going to sing. Put a little